You poor high school dropout, get out. You have no place here in this elite, members-only opulence. This yell reverberated through the corridors, completely out of place. The voice belonged to a hot-tempered, attractive woman who had been a beloved classmate since middle school. She had come without invitation, and as soon as she saw me, she began to abuse me. The gathering's atmosphere was soured when she protested that the organizers had completely failed to invite her, even when one of them attempted to step in. Despite not receiving an invitation herself, it appears that she learned about this place from our classmates' social media posts. She was compulsively browsing the social media accounts of yet another old classmate with whom she had little or no relationship. A number of students who shared the material appeared to have regrets. They had no idea that a student they didn't even follow or have a close relationship with would take the time to read their posts. Additionally, none of the classmates who posted had made it clear whose reunion they were referring about. Did you want to attend the high school reunion, the middle school reunion, or the elementary school reunion? She did, however, find the classmates who posted and discovered that they were all from our middle school years. The other classmates in attendance were extremely surprised when she boasted about it. To be honest, her level of obsession was terrifying. Since she is hated, Emily was not invited to the reunion. Despite this, she seems to still think she is popular, as she did in middle school, and she complained to the organizer that the reunion couldn't begin without her, the class star. She gave a triumphant snort when the organizer apologized for not inviting her. She then began to torment me once again after realizing I was still there. She was very annoying with her loud and annoying ranting. Ultimately, the disturbance was an annoyance and was clearly causing discomfort for the other students. I inquired as to whether I should actually go. I chose to depart after she said that my presence was in fact an annoyance. I told my pupils not to worry about me and opened the door to go when they tried to stop me. She exclaimed that she was relieved as I was leaving, as if I could hear her. She had no idea what a horrible experience the following morning would bring. I'm Jack, and I'm 34. I'll be 35 in a few months. My parents, grandparents, and I are a family of 4. I was recently kicked out of a secret area of a posh traditional inn that was only open by reference. For our reunion, basically a get-together of our middle school classmates. This inn was booked out. Whether they were class or age group reunions, we have always referred to these kinds of events as simply reunions. Emily, a classmate from middle school, was the one who drove me out of the reunion site and treated me like a pauper. Emily was seen negatively by her peers when she began showing off her position as a president's daughter in middle school. We all knew as classmates that her father's business was too little to justify such behavior. She was, in fact, the daughter of a president, but that didn't make her superior to other people. Emily constantly pretended to be better than everyone else, but she particularly denigrated me and called me poor, presumably because I didn't express my feelings much, which Emily didn't find funny. I didn't reply to Emily's remarks or cry like other of my classmates did. Instead, I chose to ignore them. Despite my frustration, I kept it to myself. I thought it was useless to respond. I believe I know why Emily thought I was impoverished. She may have assumed we were a single-parent household because I was living with my mother at the time. Emily thought I was impoverished because, to her, a single-parent household equated to poverty. With such biased views, it seemed futile to dispute with someone like Emily. We weren't a single-parent household at the time, even though I was living alone with my mother. Since my father didn't live with us, it might appear that we were raised by a single parent, but he did provide for our financial needs. My father is a Japanese-American international lawyer who holds legal degrees from California and Japan. He was employed in the California office of a major law business that has offices all over the world. He was moved to Japan, nevertheless, while I was in the 4th grade of primary school. My mother and I thought about following him to Japan at the time, but we decided against it for a reason. Even after 10 years of marriage, My father had not been accepted by my mother's parents or my grandparents. My mother and I made the decision to remain in California in order to persuade them. Despite their disapproval of my father, my grandparents were always loving toward me. My father would come visit us once or twice a year for a lengthy vacation, but my mother and I stayed in California since it seemed she didn't want to take away my devoted grandparents. My mother got married just after graduating from college, which is presumably why my grandparents were against it. My mother had just begun her profession, but my father was 6 years older and had more life experience. My father told me that my mother had chased him with passion, but my grandparents may have thought that my father had enchanted their daughter. Even though he was of American blood and spoke English fluently, my grandparents also found it difficult to understand that he was not truly American. Though they had not emotionally reconciled it, they could comprehend it conceptually. In an effort to convince them, my mother and I would frequently visit my grandparents and assist with the family company. I started to believe that I wanted to work in my grandparents' field someday while I was assisting them with their company. In the summer of my 3rd year of middle school, I made this request. Maybe someday I can take over here. My mother and grandmother were taken aback by what I said. Their astonishment was understandable because I looked up to my father and had said when I was younger that I wanted to practice law like him. My mother and grandparents likely believed that I still wanted to be a lawyer, even though it's common for childhood goals to shift. Everything changed after this realization. My mother had married my father, and I was going to be a lawyer, so apparently my grandparents had been concerned about not having an heir. My father would have abandoned his career as a lawyer to work with my mother if she had made it clear that she would take charge. Even as his kid, I could see how much my father loved my mother. His displays of affection were so numerous that I was ashamed to observe them. Naturally, he lavished me with love as well. Perhaps my father's too direct displays of devotion were the reason I was reluctant to show my feelings. My father began discussing resigning from his position and returning to America when I showed interest in taking over my grandparents' company. He had fulfilled his aim of becoming a lawyer, so I felt it was a waste, but he didn't want to live apart from my mother and me. My grandfather remarked, "Jack can take over when he's an adult," and proposed that I move in with my father in Japan, although my mother and I were concerned about this. My grandmother agreed, stating that it was odd that the family had to live apart for such a long time. It was planned that I would travel to Japan as soon as I finished middle school because, in effect, they had accepted my father. Following that, everything was hectic, including getting a visa, getting ready to move, choosing schools, and more. There was a lot to accomplish. I eventually attended high school and college in Japan before coming back to the United States at the age of 22 to begin getting ready to take over my grandparents' company. My father promised to resign his work and accompany me back to America once it was decided that I would. However, my mother convinced him to stay in Japan because she wanted to. In order to keep my father from leaving his ideal work, my mother may have insisted on staying in Japan even if she didn't really want to. I moved home with my grandparents in order to get ready to take over the family business. My grandparents were generally kind, but when it came to labor, they were strict. They would ruthlessly reprimand me if I even slightly neglected my duties. After a while of rigorous supervision as a successor, my grandfather unexpectedly became ill. Even though he was still employed, his body must have reached its limit at the age of 74. At the age of 71, my grandma also made the decision to retire. Workers who had worked for my grandparents for a longer period of time than I had, and who had been involved since they were young, acknowledged me as the heir and concurred that I should assume the role. Even if there were still some questions, I made the decision to go under my grandparents' direction. I intended to include the suggestions of the younger staff members while maintaining the elements that my grandparents valued. I had been in charge for 5 years, and it was time to launch new projects. I was living a very hectic life as a result of this. My parents would occasionally come from Japan to assist. My father and my grandparents get along well now. Now, It's normal for my grandparents to give him hugs. I got a call from Michael, a good friend and classmate from middle school, as we were getting ready to begin putting these new efforts into action. Michael's call must have been about something important because he knew I was busy. I was shocked to see our old classmate Sarah there with Michael when I got to the meeting spot. After hearing their narrative, I realized why they got together. "We've decided to get married," they declared. I had assumed Michael would be by alone. In middle school, Michael and Sarah were my classmates, but they had not dated since. They attended different high schools and universities, as I recall. It came out that Sarah, who was motivated to become a nurse by the illness of her loving grandmother, was working at the hospital where Michael was admitted after overworking himself and becoming ill. Everyone was aware that since middle school, after her grandma passed away, Sarah had dreamed of becoming a nurse. Sarah had attended a high school with a nursing program, I recalled. She had been admired by many boys, drawn to her gentle and serene disposition. Michael was now an attorney. I had known Michael since we were kids, and since our homes were next to one another, I was also aware of his lawyer father. Michael shared my desire to follow in my father's footsteps and become a lawyer. Michael had achieved his aim of becoming a lawyer, but I had taken a different route. He was a perfect choice for the position because of his strong sense of justice, and he frequently served as our class's mediator. The news that Sarah, the class's Madonna, and Michael, who was renowned for having a strong sense of justice, were getting married was noteworthy. I wanted to know how our peers would respond. Michael wanted to inform me in person, but they intended to announce their marriage on the class group chat. Michael's remark moved me, and I felt both embarrassed and happy at the same moment. It seemed different coming from a close friend, even though I had received overt displays of love from my family. I said, "Why don't we organize a reunion?" in an attempt to gain Michael's affection. One of the most important events in our class was the marriage of Michael and Sarah. I thought it was a little dull to announce their marriage via a group chat, but I also wanted to see how our classmates would respond. But my idea caused Michael and Sarah to seem conflicted. I recalled that 5 years prior, I had not received the invitation to the 15-year reunion, which was conducted every 5 years. Michael and Sarah looked at each other and then explained what had happened when I inquired. Only my close classmates knew that I had moved to Japan after middle school. Emily wouldn't know, of course. When Emily discovered that someone else was residing in my former home, and that there was no indication that I was enrolled in a local high school, it seems that she formed rash assumptions. She had been spreading untrue rumors among her classmates, saying that I couldn't afford high school and was working at a construction site, or that I had flooded into poverty in the middle of the night. Naturally, Emily's lies were refuted by my friends who were aware that I had relocated to Japan, and as a result, no one now believes her. But as a result of these falsehoods, Emily gained even more resentment and was kicked out of a group chat that was made without her. The group chat with Emily is barely working right now. The truth is that, even though Emily was a classmate, she never replied to invitations for the 5th and 10th year reunions. On the day of both reunions, though, she turned up and made the absurd statement, "It's dull without me," without even paying the participation fee. This sparked conversations about stopping the reunions if it meant inviting Emily. I was in Japan for the 5th reunion, so I was unable to attend, and I was too busy learning the ropes at work to attend the 10th. Only close friends have been getting together ever since, almost like little reunions. When it came to throwing a reunion, Michael and Sarah were apprehensive that Emily's presence might ruin the fun. Even though I could disregard Emily's provocations, I didn't want to think about her destroying the atmosphere of the reunion. I therefore proposed that we ask everyone in the class group chat that was made without Emily. Since there was a chat group with no Emily, I had expected that everyone would agree not to invite her. However, I was surprised by the support for inviting her to be zero. That not a single person, not even Sarah or Michael, suggested inviting her astonished me. Even if they didn't like her, several others expressed that they wouldn't go if Emily was present. Emily had apparently been verbally abusing and demeaning her peers in both high school and college. Soon, classmates who had been her victims began to complain in the discussion. Michael changed the subject by offering himself and Sarah as organizers in a reply. As a result, the topic of conversation changed from disparaging Emily to organizing the reunion. It's typical of Michael, who was driven by justice. It's not exactly enjoyable to see a conversation full of insults. Former classmates started to arrive at the location one by one on the day of the reunion. This time, the reunion took place in a special, rented area of a posh hotel reserved for members only, where admission is required with an invitation. As the start time drew near, I was thrilled to see how enthralled everyone was with the location. For the introductory remarks, Michael and Sarah took the microphone. "We're getting married," Michael then declared, his face heated. After a brief period of silence, congratulations began to pour in from all sides, and a joyous spirit quickly filled the room. Before long, Michael and Sarah were encircled by people who were asking them a lot of questions. I started crying as I watched them hesitantly respond. Even though I struggled to express my feelings, happy tears seemed to come easily. Perhaps as I've become older, I've started to resemble my father, who expresses his feelings freely. It made me smile to think that my father would be publicly crying and expressing his happiness at such a time. We experienced a surge of nostalgia as we reflected on our middle school years. Our class was known for being close-knit, even with Emily. Seniors in our club events even questioned some of us about how we got to be so close. There were also individuals who heard from pals in other courses that we were almost strangely close. Our homeroom teacher had previously voiced concern that our tight relationships would cause us to become distracted from our exam preparation. It appears that our bond hasn't changed in 20 years. After a brief period of excitement due to Michael and Sarah's unexpected marriage announcement, the venue calmed down as everyone started to share their most recent news. Abruptly, a ruckus broke out next to the corridor that connected the annex to the main building. An employee was attempting to stop someone, as I could see. As the voices became louder, most of the spectators began to notice, not just me standing close to the entrance. Then Emily appeared from the doorway, where everyone's attention was now fixed. "How dare you not invite me?" Emily said as she rushed through the sliding doors as everyone's eyes were fixed on the entry. Her misdirected yells reverberated throughout the private members-only room. I sighed in shock that Emily, who was beyond 30, was still acting selfishly. She turned when she saw me close to the entrance and yelled, "The poor person and high school dropout should just leave. You don't belong here." Although Emily had always had a lovely face, her nasty demeanor was now clearly visible. Since I've been concerned by her since the beginning, I apologize for thinking this way, even though I know I shouldn't judge individuals by their outward appearance. She was insulting me even though I had invited her. "This is an open house. It's not a reunion," I informed her. Since this event was formally an open house, the sign at the entrance at the conclusion also read, "Open House." I suggested this concept to Michael and Sarah after we decided not to invite her in the group chat. They were worried about not admitting anyone because of their strong sense of justice and kindness. The excuse that it was merely a coincidence that the invitees were old acquaintances was offered by a lavish open house for the recently constructed annex. Sarah and Michael, who most likely didn't want to deal with her anyway, immediately agreed when they heard my offer. Initially taken aback, Emily then started to vent after discovering that everyone present was a classmate, indicating that this was clearly a reunion. "You're disqualified as an organizer for forgetting to invite me," Emily said to Sarah as she came forward as the chaos increased. Emily proudly described how she found out about this reunion before launching into a tirade against Sarah. It appears that she obtained this information by searching through the social media accounts of former classmates with whom she had no communication. Classmates who commented about the reunion were contrite. They most likely never thought Emily would review their accounts so thoroughly. None of the classmates who blogged about the reunion had said which one it was. Was it the high school reunion, the middle school reunion, or the elementary school one? However, Emily painstakingly went through the posts made by her old classmates and found that they were all from her middle school years. It was really terrifying how obsessed she was with going to such extremes. Not only did I feel this way, but there were whispers of fear among the guests. She went on to say that she was skilled at obtaining information because of her work as an influencer. However, as was said in the previous group discussion, she hardly had 100 SNS followers. She essentially pretended to be an influencer without realizing how unpopular she was. "The party doesn't start without popular me," she demanded, and she went up to Sarah. Emily gave Sarah a victorious grin as she apologized. She started to bother me once again after noticing me, with the potential to disrupt the class and cause discomfort for her peers. Her loud tirades were nothing short of a nuisance. I'd had enough. "If you're going to say that, should I just leave?" I questioned her. She maintained that having me around was more of a bother. "All right then, I'll leave the rest to you." My students attempted to stop me as I declared my desire to exit the place. Isn't it ridiculous to hold back a dropout, a guy like him? Emily exclaimed, smiling as she saw this. I reassured my classmates, urged them to have fun, and went outdoors. Emily's voice trailed after me, expressing relief at my leaving. It struck me as ironic, given the problems she would have the next day. After everyone had paid their fees, Emily's loud voice reverberated in the foyer the following morning. "What's with this amount?" cried Emily, the final person to pay, as she saw the bill. She was stunned when she saw the $225,000 bill. It was an amount she couldn't afford as a self-described influencer. Sarah went over to the workers and accused them of fraud and extortion. "You promised to take responsibility yesterday, didn't you?" After the reunion concluded last night, I departed for Michael and found out what had transpired. Emily persisted in her scathing remarks about her students even after I had left. She started behaving too familiar with Michael after learning that he was a lawyer. Emily identified herself as an influencer without a job. Michael made it clear that he preferred independent people, but Emily assumed he was referring to her. Michael was about to say anything when Sarah announced that he was her fiancé, but he was carried away alone, believing she wouldn't understand unless he explained it. But Sarah was humiliated by Emily, who called her ugly and uninteresting. Then she abruptly said she had no interest in Michael, even though she had been smitten with him only seconds before. Even I was stunned when I later learned about it. I didn't understand how someone could be so brash after aggressively flirting with someone and then brushing them off, whether it was pride or something else. The pupils who stayed at the scene were undoubtedly as shocked and gaping. After some time, the reunion had to end because of Emily's actions. No one disagreed with Emily's insistence that it was too early to call it quits. After witnessing Emily's continuous attempts to get the guys to continue drinking, Michael made the decision to sign and let the staff know that it was done. Emily was about to leave the venue when Sarah, with great reluctance, said, "You'll have to take responsibility for driving Jack away." She smiled as she said it. When Michael told me this, he appeared somewhat alarmed, as though he could already picture the day when he would be totally controlled by Sarah. I couldn't contain my laughter. Emily became quite perplexed by Sarah's comment and began making a commotion, asking that the front desk manager take accountability. Knowing this would occur, Emily was clearly disgusted when I arrived and exclaimed, "Are you still here, you wretched thing? Simply vanish." She was shocked when I said, "Didn't you call me here?" Actually, I am currently operating this historic inn that I inherited from my grandparents. Since last year, a new project plan has included the construction of the inn that would host the reunion. Being a traditional inn is no longer enough to draw guests in this day and age. We therefore intend to make the inn accessible to walk-in guests as well. In the future, we might rent it out for corporate retreats and weddings. As a monitor, I had asked the reunion attendees to complete surveys so I could use their input to inform future preparations. As a close friend, I wanted to provide a suitable setting for Michael's marriage announcement. But if Michael had known the true cause, I knew he would have hesitated. I invited everyone under the pretense of a viewing party because of this. I explained everything, but Emily was unconvinced that a poor dropout could manage a posh inn. Michael then added, "I think Jack's family is probably richer than Emily, but it might be strange for me to talk about someone else's family." He clarified that my father was an international lawyer and that this was the inn where my mother's family lived. Emily ceased referring to me as impoverished, but she offered justifications, stating that she refused to accept cash. But last night, I had made it very obvious to her that it was a viewing party. Because her classmates were present, she was the one who thought it was a reunion. Emily maintained, however, that the sum was outrageous. There was nothing I could do but break out the amount in detail. Participants in the viewing party paid $200 to act as monitors. One requirement was that participants complete a survey. I, the owner, wanted to see how the participants truly responded. Thus, that was part of the goal. However, I was unable to observe their responses because Emily pushed me out, so I chose to bill Emily the difference for the 25 participants. I utilized the main building's pricing of $1,200 per person, less the $200 charge, which came to $1,000 per person for 25 guests, because the inn's room rates weren't finalized yet. Emily was receiving what she was due, despite her claims that she was unable to pay such a sum. Michael informed her that she was fortunate not to be held accountable for the harm she had done to the viewing party. Participants were required to complete a survey, but Emily suggested an installment plan that would only cost $100 a month. That sum is out of proportion. It was an absurd plan that would take years to pay off $25,000. Someone I had contacted showed up at that very moment. Emily's face went white as she saw this individual, and she froze. Anticipating Emily's incapacity to pay, I had contacted her father first thing in the morning. I had Emily's father's contact information because he has a towel rental business and had been to this inn on several business trips. I had rejected his proposals, assuming he was being offered a contract, because we do our own laundry and sanitation, and had no plans to employ a rental service. After I explained the issue, Emily's father quickly arrived but was forced to apologize with his daughter. He apologized and begged for mercy, pointing to the dire financial state of his company. I had the almost admiring notion, like father, like daughter. Forgiving them now would, in a sense, only encourage Emily to go on additional outbursts. She showed no regret and had the audacity to say, "I'll marry you," even in such a circumstance. Emily started crying as I suggested contacting our legal counsel. When Michael noticed this, he told Emily's father, who was sitting there in disbelief, to remove the sobbing Emily from the front area right once to prevent any disruption to the inn's operations. After that, Emily's father quickly took her arm and ushered her outside. In the hotel business, Emily's father's towel rental business wasn't well known for providing towels with mold or stains that couldn't be cleaned. I had heard that the company was losing contracts quickly as a result of the careless service. Additionally, I was informed that Emily's father attempted to make ridiculous demands, such as requesting contracts in return for marrying off his lovely daughter. Emily was really lovely, even when she was silent. Rumor had it that someone who had accepted a blind date after being enchanted by her pictures was totally repulsed by her demeanor. Emily must have pushed her way into the reunion in search of a new source to suck from after finding out that her father's business was going bankrupt. Regretfully, none of her classmates who were aware of her personality expressed interest in dating her in the future. Michael was in charge of alerting Emily and her father's business about the financial obligations associated with this tragedy. At the past 2 years, Michael has worked at the inn as a legal advisor. My folks came back to America 2 years ago. Michael, who had always respected my father, made the decision to quit his office job and pursue his studies under my father's tutelage at that time. Michael's enthusiasm convinced my father, who had planned to retire after returning to America, to start his own legal practice. Michael manages the majority of the operations, although my father serves as the representative. Until he is prepared to lead alone, it is agreed that Michael will take over the company with my father's assistance. Michael will soon take over as head of the inn, as my father now spends most of his time there. My parents ended up paying Emily's payment because she was unable to do so. However, her father's business went bankrupt as a result of the chaos she created at the inn's front desk. Emily's mother left the family because she was tired of her husband lavishing attention on their rebellious daughter. After working several jobs, Emily and her father moved into a little apartment. Personally, I'm still putting in a lot of effort at the inn. I live contentedly with my mom and grandma, although my grandfather went away last year. I've been arranging the new inn's opening since last year, and it's finally happening. Sarah and Michael will be the first visitors. Sarah and Michael made the decision to employ the inn's wedding package. In return for using their wedding for future advertising, we promised to provide it to them at a reduced price. I would have been pleased to provide it at a reduced price, even if there had been no advertising arrangement. But knowing Michael and Sarah, they would have insisted on paying the standard price. We decided on the modeling as Michael, our legal advisor, is aware of the standard fees, and I couldn't fool him. Observing their joyous occasions inspires me to get married as well, albeit I have no specific partner in mind. How about Emily? Not at all. One thing that is completely impossible is that